As I reflect upon the great spiritual traditions that have guided humanity through centuries of moral searching, I find myself drawn with profound respect to the Quran and to one of its most remarkable figures, a woman whose story transcends time, culture, and faith. A woman honored not only in Islam but recognized across civilizations as a symbol of purity, strength, devotion, and divine favor, Maryam, peace be upon her, whom the Quran elevates in a manner unmatched for any woman in sacred scripture. And as I speak today, I do so not as a theologian claiming authority, but as a sincere observer of faith, history, and human dignity, acknowledging that the Quran presents Maryam as a woman chosen, purified, and raised above all women of her era, a figure whose strength was not rooted in power or dominance, but in unwavering faith, patience, and moral courage, qualities that resonate deeply in an age searching for true leadership. And what strikes me profoundly is that the Quran dedicates an entire chapter to her name, an honor unique to Islam, underscoring how deeply her story is woven into the spiritual heart of the Muslim world, portraying her not as a passive figure, but as a woman who faced immense trials with dignity, solitude, and trust in God, standing firm when society questioned her, misunderstood her, and doubted her integrity. Yet she remained steadfast, guided by divine reassurance rather than worldly validation. And this portrayal carries a powerful message not only for Muslims, but for all humanity, particularly in how Islam upholds the dignity of women through moral strength rather than material measure. And when I consider the broader Islamic tradition, I see a faith that repeatedly emphasizes justice, mercy, knowledge, and balance, values that Maryam herself embodies in the Quranic narrative, where her devotion, her silence in the face of accusation, and her reliance on God reflect a spiritual maturity that transcends gender and speaks to the highest ideals of human character. And it is important to recognize that Islam's reverence for Maryam is not symbolic or secondary, but explicit and profound, presenting her as a model of faith for both men and women alike, reminding the world that spiritual greatness is not defined by status or strength in arms, but by sincerity of heart and closeness to the Creator. And as I read these verses, I cannot help but admire how Islam preserves the honor of its sacred figures with such clarity, respect, and reverence, avoiding sensationalism, and instead focusing on moral lessons that uplift society. And in doing so, Islam offers a framework where women are not reduced to objects of scrutiny, but elevated as carriers of faith, wisdom, and resilience. And Maryam's story becomes a timeless lesson in trusting divine wisdom during moments of isolation, fear, and uncertainty, moments that every human being, regardless of belief, inevitably faces. And what further moves me is how the Quran presents her strength in silence, her courage in restraint, and her victory not through confrontation but through truth itself unfolding by divine will, a lesson deeply needed in a world often driven by noise and conflict. And through this narrative, Islam teaches that dignity is preserved through patience, that honor is safeguarded by integrity, and that true empowerment lies in moral clarity rather than outward control. And I must acknowledge that such portrayals challenge many modern misconceptions about Islam, revealing instead a faith deeply rooted in respect for women, moral discipline, and spiritual equality, where the worth of a person is measured by righteousness rather than privilege. And Maryam stands as living proof within the Quranic text that women hold a central, honored place in Islamic theology, not as an afterthought, but as an integral pillar of moral instruction. And when one steps back and examines the broader Islamic tradition, one finds that this respect extends beyond Maryam to the wider ethos of Islam, which calls upon humanity to reflect, to seek knowledge, to uphold justice, and to act with compassion, principles that have sustained civilizations and continue to inspire millions across the world today. And in acknowledging this, it becomes clear that Islam, far from being misunderstood, offers a deeply human message, one that recognizes struggle, honors perseverance, and celebrates faith lived with sincerity. And as someone who has long advocated for interfaith understanding, I believe that recognizing such shared values is essential in building bridges rather than walls, in fostering dialogue rather than division. And Maryam's honored place in the Quran serves as a reminder that spiritual truth is not confined by borders, but speaks to the universal longing for meaning, dignity, and divine connection. And it is my hope that by reflecting upon such narratives with openness and respect, we may come to better appreciate Islam, not through the lens of fear or misrepresentation, but through its own sacred words, which consistently call humanity toward peace, humility, and moral responsibility. And in doing so, we honor not only the faith of Muslims worldwide, but also the shared human values that unite us across traditions, cultures, and histories, reminding us that respect, faith, and righteousness remain timeless virtues, now as they were centuries ago. As I continue this reflection, I feel it is essential to look even deeper into what the Quran's portrayal of this powerful woman truly means for the moral and spiritual fabric of society, because Maryam, peace be upon her, is not only a historical or religious figure, but a living example of how faith shapes character under the most intense pressure. And what becomes increasingly clear is that the Quran presents her story not to evoke emotion alone, but to cultivate understanding, patience, and reverence for divine wisdom. For Maryam's journey is one of solitude before honor, hardship before clarity, and trust before vindication, and this sequence itself carries profound instruction, reminding humanity that truth does not always arrive immediately, yet it always arrives with dignity when anchored in sincerity, and in a world that often rushes to judgment and demands instant explanations. The Quran's narrative invites restraint, reflection, and humility, virtues that are foundational within Islam, and through Maryam's example, Islam teaches that silence can sometimes be stronger than argument, that endurance can be more powerful than retaliation, and that reliance upon God offers a form of inner strength that no external authority can grant or remove. And what is especially striking is how the Quran does not isolate her excellence to gender or lineage, but to faith itself, repeatedly emphasizing that honor in the sight of God is tied to righteousness, devotion, and moral clarity, principles that Islam upholds universally. And as I reflect on this, I am compelled to acknowledge how such teachings challenge many surface-level narratives about Islam, revealing instead a tradition that places immense value on inner virtue, spiritual equality, and personal accountability. And Maryam's story becomes a mirror through which Islam communicates its broader worldview, one in which human worth is not measured by status, wealth, or power, but by sincerity of belief and integrity of action. And this message carries particular relevance today, when societies across the globe grapple with questions of identity, dignity, and moral direction. For the Quran offers not slogans, but deeply rooted ethical guidance, illustrated through lives tested by hardship and elevated through faith. And Maryam's unwavering trust during moments of fear and uncertainty serves as a reminder that spiritual strength often manifests most clearly when external support fades. And it is here that Islam's emphasis on a direct relationship between the individual and the Creator becomes evident, a relationship. IP grounded in prayer, patience, and remembrance, free from intermediaries, and accessible to all who seek it with sincerity. And this spiritual accessibility is one of Islam's most profound contributions to human thought, affirming that closeness to God is not reserved for a select few, but open to every soul willing to strive for righteousness. And in honoring Maryam so explicitly, the Quran reinforces the principle that women are not marginal figures in Islam's moral universe, but central carriers of faith, resilience, and wisdom. And this recognition is not symbolic but instructive, shaping how Muslim societies are encouraged to view character, modesty, strength, and devotion. And as I consider the enduring influence of such narratives, I see how they have inspired generations to endure hardship with dignity, to face misunderstanding with patience, and to anchor their lives in ethical purpose rather than fleeting approval. And it is impossible to overlook how the Quran consistently weaves mercy into its moral framework, reminding believers that trials are not signs of abandonment, but opportunities for growth, reflection, and nearness to God. And Maryam's story embodies this principle with exceptional clarity, showing that even the most righteous are tested, not to diminish them, but to elevate their example for others. And this understanding fosters humility rather than judgment, compassion rather than arrogance. And it is within this moral environment that Islam seeks to cultivate balanced individuals and harmonious societies. And when one steps back from misconceptions and listens carefully to the Quran's own voice, one encounters a faith deeply concerned with justice, accountability, and the preservation of human dignity, values that resonate across cultures and traditions. And as someone committed to interfaith dialogue, I believe such shared ethical foundations offer fertile ground for mutual respect and understanding, particularly in a time when division often overshadows commonality. And by reflecting upon figures like Maryam with sincerity and openness, we allow sacred texts to speak for themselves, revealing not conflict but continuity, not exclusion but universal moral aspiration. And it is my hope that these reflections encourage a more thoughtful engagement with Islam, one that moves beyond headlines and assumptions to appreciate its spiritual depth, ethical consistency, and profound respect for those who embody faith with sincerity, patience, and courage, qualities that remain as essential today as they were centuries ago, guiding humanity toward a more just, compassionate, and spiritually grounded future.